Working 2 exhausting jobs just to stay afloat, buried under debt that was never hers to begin with, Emily Carter had long accepted survival as her only goal. Then, in a single unexpected moment, everything shifted. What should have been just another draining night ended with an accident she thought would haunt her for all the wrong reasons, spilling hot coffee on one of the most powerful women in the city. Instead, it became the beginning of something far more significant than she could have imagined. That night unfolded inside the worn walls of Murphy's Diner, where the hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of grease clung to everything, including Emily's fading energy. Her life had become a cycle of endless labor, 14-hour days split between a quiet bookstore and the late-night grind of waitressing. Still, the calls from debt collectors never stopped. The burden of her father's medical bills loomed over her, inescapable and suffocating. Just before midnight, the atmosphere shifted. A woman stepped inside who seemed entirely out of place. Victoria Hale carried herself with quiet authority, every detail of her presence reflecting wealth, precision, and control. She looked like someone who shaped the world rather than endured it. Emily recognized her instantly. The kind of figure you see in magazines, someone whose success stories feel almost unreal until they're standing right in front of you. Victoria chose a quiet corner, away from the few remaining customers. Emily approached with a coffee pot in hand, trying to steady herself. There was something intimidating about people like Victoria, a sense that they saw everything and nothing at the same time. When their eyes met, it felt startlingly intense, as if Emily had been pulled into a moment she didn't fully understand. Fatigue betrayed her. Her hands trembled, and in an instant, the coffee spilled, spreading across the table, soaking into important-looking papers, dripping onto a coat that probably cost more than she earned in months. Embarrassment hit hard and fast. Apologies tumbled out as she scrambled to clean the mess, desperate to fix what couldn't be undone. But Victoria didn't react the way Emily expected. There was no anger, no sharp dismissal. Instead, there was calm and something softer beneath it. When their hands brushed briefly in the chaos, a strange, electric feeling passed between them, freezing time in that small, imperfect space. Emily assumed that would be the end of it, a humiliating moment forgotten by someone who lived in a completely different world. Yet 3 days later, Victoria returned. This time, she came directly to Emily's section, as if there had never been any doubt about where she would sit. The conversation that followed changed everything. Victoria knew things she shouldn't have known, about the debt, the medical bills, the constant pressure closing in around Emily's life. There was no accusation in her voice, only certainty and a quiet kind of understanding. Then came the offer, simple in its structure but overwhelming in its impact. One night, one appearance. A role to play at a high-profile event, standing beside Victoria as her partner. In return, every dollar of Emily's crushing debt would disappear. The number alone was staggering, over $40,000. Freedom, handed over in exchange for something that sounded almost unreal. It felt dangerous, too easy, like stepping into a world where nothing came without consequences. Yet beneath the shock there was something else, an unexplainable pull. The same quiet spark that had existed since that first accidental meeting. Emily didn't take time to weigh every risk or imagine every possible outcome. The decision came from somewhere deeper, something instinctive and impossible to ignore. She agreed. What followed moved quickly. A formal contract appeared at her door, filled with legal language that turned the surreal into something tangible. Alongside it, a handwritten note softened the edges of the arrangement, signed simply with a name that felt unexpectedly personal. Soon, Emily found herself stepping into a world she had only ever seen from a distance. Expensive boutiques, carefully chosen gowns, mirrors reflecting a version of herself she barely recognized. The transformation wasn't just external. With every step closer to the event, the line between who she was and who she was pretending to be began to blur. And somewhere in the middle of it all, beneath the surface of an agreement built on necessity, something deeper started to grow, something neither of them had planned for, and neither could easily walk away from. Overwhelming, I admitted, still trying to process it all. The dress alone cost more than I paid for rent in months. You're worth it. The words landed with unexpected force, cutting through layers I didn't even realize I'd built around myself. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that, so long since anyone had given without expecting something greater in return. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to exist inside that kind of sincerity. Her name slipped from my lips before I could stop it, followed by silence. The thoughts tangled together, impossible to shape into something coherent. She sensed it anyway. Her voice stayed calm, carefully controlled, though something fragile hid beneath it. I assured her there was no hesitation, no regret, yet the question still pressed forward. The reason behind everything lingered, unspoken until it finally surfaced. The quiet that followed stretched long enough to feel heavy. When she spoke again, her tone had softened, stripped of its usual precision. She spoke about invisibility, not the kind that hides you from sight, but the kind that erases you even when you're standing in plain view. A life where people only see what they expect, never what's real beneath it. Her words mirrored something deeply familiar. Days spent blending into the background, moving from one job to the next, existing without ever truly being seen. It was a different world, yet the same kind of loneliness. In her world, she was defined before she ever spoke. Power, control, perfection, labels that left no room for anything human. Yet in that small, accidental moment at the diner, something had shifted. For once, she had been looked at without expectation, without calculation, just seen. The feeling that stirred inside my chest was complicated, impossible to ignore. It made everything heavier and lighter at the same time. The conversation ended sooner than I wanted, replaced by logistics and details that felt almost too ordinary for something so life-altering. A car would arrive at 7. The driver's name was Marcus. Everything would be handled. A quiet request slipped out before I could reconsider it. I wanted her there. Not just the arrangement, not just the plan. I wanted her presence. The pause that followed carried weight, then came her answer, steady and certain. When the call ended, the silence of my apartment felt different. The plan had been simple from the beginning: one night, one role, one solution. Clean, transactional, controlled. Yet nothing about it felt simple anymore. Friday arrived too quickly, carrying a restless energy that refused to settle. The dress waited in my closet like something unreal, elegant and unfamiliar, belonging to a version of me I didn't fully recognize. Standing in front of the mirror, I worked through the details with unsteady hands, piecing together an image that felt both foreign and strangely right. By the time the car arrived, my heart was already racing. The sleek black vehicle waiting outside looked like it belonged to another world entirely. Inside, Marcus greeted me with quiet warmth, but it was her presence that stole the air from my lungs. She looked flawless, composed in a way that seemed effortless, every detail perfectly in place. Yet when her eyes found mine, something shifted, something unguarded that flickered just beneath the surface. For a moment, words failed both of us. What she finally said was simple, but the way she said it carried meaning far beyond the surface. Perfect. The city blurred past as the car carried us forward. She explained what to expect: the names, the stories, the illusion we would present together. 3 months. A carefully constructed narrative built on something that had started as an accident. The irony lingered, quiet but undeniable. As the destination drew closer, the nerves returned, sharper this time. Doubt crept in, whispering about belonging, about whether I could truly step into a world that had never been mine. She turned toward me then, her composure giving way to something real. Even surrounded by power and influence, she admitted to feeling something unfamiliar, something that mattered enough to make her uneasy. That honesty grounded me more than anything else could have. When the car finally stopped, the world outside felt dazzling and distant at the same time. Lights, cameras, attention, all of it waiting just beyond the door. Her hand found mine, steady and warm, anchoring me in the moment. That single touch quieted everything else. Inside, the space unfolded like something out of a dream. Light reflected off polished surfaces, conversations flowed effortlessly, and every movement seemed deliberate, practiced. For a brief second, it felt like I was standing outside of it all, watching a life that didn't belong to me. Then her presence pulled me back in. A subtle touch, a quiet reassurance, and suddenly I wasn't observing anymore, I was part of it. Attention followed us as we moved through the room, curiosity lingering in every glance. Questions formed without being asked, assumptions built in silence. Yet she navigated it all with ease, introducing me with a confidence that made the lie feel almost real. The word she used, girlfriend, settled somewhere deeper than expected. It was meant to be part of the act, just another detail in the story we were telling. Still, it carried a weight that couldn't be dismissed. Not everyone accepted it without scrutiny. Some looked past me, dismissing me before I could even speak. Others masked judgment behind polite curiosity. Yet every time the tension rose, she shifted subtly, her presence firm and unyielding in a way that made it clear I wasn't there by accident. At the bar, glasses of champagne replaced the stiffness with something lighter. The moment felt almost normal, almost real, as if the line between performance and truth had started to blur beyond recognition. Time moved differently after that. Conversations flowed more easily, confidence building with each passing moment. The role I had been given began to feel less like an act and more like a version of myself I had never allowed to exist. When she told me I belonged there, it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like recognition. Not everyone shared that perspective. A woman approached with polished elegance and a sharp edge hidden beneath her smile. Her words carried a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes, every compliment layered with quiet judgment. The question she asked seemed simple, but the tone behind it said everything. I answered honestly, refusing to dress it up into something more acceptable. The reaction came exactly as expected, dismissive, condescending, carefully disguised as humor. It lingered in the air for only a second before something shifted. Victoria stepped forward, her presence changing in an instant. The softness disappeared, replaced by something precise and unyielding. Her voice dropped, quiet but edged with warning, the kind that didn't need to be raised to be understood. And just like that, the balance of power tilted. Melissa. The name alone carried a warning, but it didn't stop the thin smile that followed. She brushed it off lightly, though the gleam in her eyes told a different story, something sharper, something deliberate. Her words sounded polite on the surface, yet every syllable dripped with quiet cruelty, turning the moment into a spectacle meant to expose and diminish. Heat rushed to my face, a mix of anger and humiliation tightening in my chest. This was the fear I had carried into the night, the certainty that I didn't belong here, that sooner or later someone would see through the illusion and reduce me to exactly what they believed I was. Then everything shifted. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't defend or explain. Instead, she turned away completely, as if Melissa had ceased to exist, and focused entirely on me. Her voice carried just enough volume to reach the surrounding ears, steady and intentional. She asked me to dance. It wasn't an escape disguised as politeness. It was a decision, clear and undeniable. In that moment, she chose me over someone who belonged to her world, someone with influence and familiarity. The weight of that choice settled deep, steadying something inside me that had been unraveling. I accepted, letting her lead me away from the tension and into the center of the room. The music wrapped around us, soft and elegant, guiding the movement of every couple across the floor. When her hand settled at my waist and our fingers intertwined, everything else faded into the background. What should have felt awkward instead felt effortless. Her movements were fluid, confident, guiding without pressure, and somehow my body responded as if it already knew the rhythm. We moved together with a quiet synchronicity, as though this connection had existed long before the night began. Her warmth grounded me, pulling me fully into the moment. She apologized under her breath, acknowledging the tension without giving it power. There was a quiet honesty in her explanation, a recognition of the kind of people who tried to control what they couldn't understand. The reason behind the dance lingered unspoken for a beat too long, then shifted into something more personal. Her gaze met mine, steady and unguarded, and the truth slipped through without hesitation. She wanted to hold me. The simplicity of it cut through every layer of pretense. This was never supposed to feel real, never supposed to blur the lines between performance and truth. Yet the way her thumb brushed lightly across my hand, the way her eyes held mine, made it impossible to pretend this was just part of an act. The music ended, but neither of us moved. The world flowed around us, distant and irrelevant, while we remained suspended in something fragile and undefined. Eventually, she guided me away from the crowd, through curious glances and hushed whispers, out into the quiet openness of a private terrace. The cool night air softened the intensity, the city lights stretching endlessly below us like something out of reach and entirely within grasp at the same time. Standing there beside her, the distance between us felt smaller than ever. She spoke again, her tone shifting, heavier now, carrying something that couldn't be disguised as part of the arrangement. This had stopped being just about the event, about the deal, about the carefully constructed roles. Somewhere along the way, it had become real for her. The words hit hard, unraveling everything I thought I understood. The boundaries we had set blurred instantly, leaving nothing solid to stand on. It felt reckless, impossible, too fast to make sense of, yet undeniable in its sincerity. She knew things about me, details I had never offered, pieces of my life that felt too small to matter and too personal to share. Moments I thought had gone unnoticed had been seen, remembered, held on to. It wasn't just curiosity. It was attention, the kind that came from truly looking at someone. From the very beginning, I had mattered to her in a way I hadn't allowed myself to believe. The realization felt like standing at the edge of something vast and uncertain, something that could either break me or change everything. Her hand rose to my face, her touch gentle, grounding. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, to the quiet certainty in her eyes. She spoke about reality, about how being with me felt more genuine than anything else in her carefully controlled life. Every instinct told me to step back, to protect myself, to remind both of us that this was never meant to go beyond a single night. Instead, I leaned closer. The moment closed in, fragile and electric, until there was no space left between hesitation and action. Her lips met mine softly, hesitant at first, like she was offering something rather than taking it. The kiss carried uncertainty, a question without words. Answering it felt instinctive. When I kissed her back, the world settled into something clear and undeniable. There was no performance left, no illusion to maintain. Just honesty, raw and unfiltered. When we finally pulled apart, the air between us felt charged, heavy with everything that had just changed. Neither of us had a clear path forward, no plan to follow, no structure to fall back on. Only the quiet admission that whatever this was, it wasn't simple anymore. The ride that followed passed in silence, but it was no longer empty. Every glance, every breath carried meaning, the space between us filled with something unspoken yet fully understood. The night had shifted beyond anything either of us had anticipated. By the time we arrived at her building, the reality of it all settled in. The towering structure reflected everything she represented: power, success, distance, yet stepping inside felt like crossing into something far more personal. The elevator ride stretched endlessly, the rising numbers marking each second with quiet intensity. Her reflection in the polished surface revealed something unexpected, a hint of uncertainty that mirrored my own. At the top, her voice broke the silence, offering an out that felt more like vulnerability than obligation. The option to leave hung in the air, not as a dismissal but as a genuine concern. Looking at her then, it became clear that beneath everything she had built, there was fear. Not of failure or loss, but of being seen, of letting someone close enough to matter. The answer came without hesitation. Leaving was never really an option. Inside, her home told a different story than the world expected. It was refined, undeniably beautiful, yet filled with small imperfections that made it real. Books left open, quiet signs of a life lived beyond appearances. It wasn't just a space designed to impress. It was a space meant to exist in. Standing by the window, the city stretched out beneath us, vast and endless. She spoke about coming here to escape, to remind herself that there was more beyond the pressure and expectations that defined her days. In that moment, she didn't feel untouchable or distant. She felt human. The conversation drifted into something deeper, touching on the reasons behind everything she had built. The need to prove something, to validate her worth, to meet standards that never seemed to end. Yet even she wasn't sure what she was chasing anymore. Maybe there was nothing left to prove. The thought lingered between us, fragile but persistent. When the question turned back on her, asking about happiness rather than success, it caught her off guard in a way nothing else had. The answer, when it came, was simple and honest. That dance, that moment, me. Hearing it spoken so plainly stripped away any remaining doubt. Whatever this was, it wasn't just circumstance or convenience. It was something real enough to scare her, real enough to matter. And standing there, on the edge of something neither of us understood, the uncertainty didn't feel like something to avoid anymore. It felt like something worth stepping into. This feels like stepping into nothing, she admitted, her voice quieter now, stripped of its usual certainty. The distance between us had disappeared, close enough to notice the tiny golden flecks in her eyes, the faint freckles her makeup tried and failed to hide. Without the shield of control she wore so effortlessly in public, she seemed different. Softer, real in a way that caught me off guard. I let the truth spill out, unpolished and unfiltered. This was unfamiliar territory, every part of it. Attraction, connection, the way everything between us seemed to shift faster than I could understand. Life had always been about survival, about getting through each day, paying bills, staying afloat. There had never been space to wonder about desire or possibility. And now, standing in front of her, it felt like I was finally seeing what had been missing all along. Her hands rose gently, framing my face, grounding me. The warmth of her touch steadied the chaos in my chest. What she said next carried weight, heavier than anything before. This was no longer about a single night or a carefully outlined agreement. Crossing this line meant everything would change. Her world wasn't simple. It was complicated, exposed, and often unforgiving. People would judge, speculate, try to tear things apart before they had a chance to exist. There was no attempt to soften the truth, only honesty. Instead of pulling away, I leaned into it. Fear didn't feel new to me. I had lived with it in different forms my entire life. Struggle, uncertainty, the constant pressure of having nothing secure to hold on to. That kind of existence left little room for hesitation. But this was different. This felt like something worth risking for the first time. The shift in her expression was subtle but undeniable. Something stronger replaced the hesitation, something resolute. When she kissed me again, it carried that change with it. There was no uncertainty left, no careful testing of boundaries. It was certain, deliberate, full of a need that neither of us tried to hide anymore. The world outside the windows faded into nothing, leaving only the warmth between us, the quiet intensity of a moment that felt like it was rewriting everything. Time lost its shape. The city lights blurred into the background as we held onto each other like we were trying to understand something too big for words. Every hesitation I'd carried into the night dissolved, replaced by something simpler and far more honest. When we finally pulled apart, the air felt heavier, charged with everything that had changed. Her forehead rested against mine, her voice low, almost fragile, as she asked me to stay. The offer wasn't part of any agreement. It didn't belong to the world of contracts or conditions. It came from somewhere real, somewhere unguarded. There was no reason left to pretend this was still about a deal. I agreed, the word barely more than a breath, but it carried certainty. She led me through her space, a place that balanced elegance with quiet signs of life. It wasn't just luxury, it was lived in, personal in ways I hadn't expected. Small details told stories her public image never would. Books left open, a photograph carefully placed. A glimpse into the parts of her she didn't show the world. The mention of her mother shifted the atmosphere, softening it further. Loss lingered there, but so did warmth, the kind that came from being known deeply by someone who mattered. It added another layer to her, another piece of the person beneath the surface. Laughter came easier after that, surprising in its lightness. The tension eased, replaced by something quieter, something more intimate. Still, uncertainty lingered. The awareness of what came next hovered between us, unspoken but present. She gave me space, offering patience instead of expectation. It was a kind of care I hadn't anticipated, and it unraveled something inside me. The fear surfaced then, not of her, not of the moment, but of myself, of not being enough, of waking up and realizing it had all been something fleeting, something temporary. Her response wasn't complicated, it didn't need to be. She met my eyes and said what I hadn't known I needed to hear, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. I believed her. The night softened into something quieter after that, built on closeness rather than urgency. And when morning came, it arrived gently, sunlight spilling through the windows and turning everything gold. Waking beside her felt unreal at first, like something fragile that might disappear if I moved too quickly. Her presence was warm, steady, her expression peaceful in a way I hadn't seen before. The memories of the night lingered, every moment, every shift, every quiet conversation that had stretched into something meaningful. Yet daylight brought clarity with it, along with questions that couldn't be ignored. The reality of who we were settled in again. Two lives that existed in completely different worlds, colliding in a way that made no logical sense. She woke slowly, her smile unguarded, softer than anything she showed the outside world. It made everything feel real in a way that was both comforting and overwhelming. Neither of us had a map for what came next. The certainty of the night gave way to the uncertainty of morning, where everything felt larger, more complicated. Still, there was no regret, only honesty. Fear remained, but it was different now. It wasn't about loss or failure. It was about how much this mattered, how real it had become in such a short time. She admitted it openly, pacing through the room like she was trying to make sense of something that didn't follow her usual rules. This wasn't strategic, it wasn't planned. It was something she couldn't control, and that scared her. Watching her like that, stripped of the confidence she wore so easily, made everything clearer. This wasn't one-sided. This wasn't convenience or distraction. It was real for both of us. I stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than doubt. The question that formed came from a place of quiet fear, needing to understand whether this was about me or simply about wanting something different. Her answer came not as an argument, but as something deeply personal. Moments she had carried with her, thoughts that had followed her even into the most routine parts of her life. From the very beginning, it had been me, and standing there in the soft light of morning, with everything uncertain and everything possible, it felt like the truth neither of us could walk away from anymore. The memory surfaced with quiet intensity, her voice soft but certain as she described it. A small moment in the bookstore, one I had never thought anyone noticed. The way I had smiled at an elderly customer, patient and gentle, completely unaware that anyone was watching. To her, it had meant something, more than I could understand. The realization caught in my chest, stealing my breath. She had seen me there, in the most ordinary version of my life, when I wasn't trying to impress anyone, when I was simply being myself. And she had returned, more than once, telling herself it was about responsibility, about keeping an eye on something she had invested in. But the truth had been different. She had been searching for an answer to a feeling she couldn't ignore. When she spoke again, her hands rose to my face with that same quiet certainty, the same touch that had unraveled me before. Her words were steady, grounded in something deeper than impulse. This wasn't about loneliness or convenience. It wasn't about filling a gap in her life, it was about me. About the things I had never thought were remarkable. The way I laughed, the way I held on to independence, the way I believed in people even when they didn't deserve it. And more than anything, it was about how I made her feel, seen in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or success or the image she carried into every room. Emotion built faster than I could contain it, pressing at the edges of my composure. Her name left my lips quietly, but she didn't let me interrupt. The truth came out simply, without hesitation, without any attempt to soften it. She was falling for me. The weight of that confession hit hard, almost disorienting. Everything about her life suggested she could choose anyone, that she had endless options, endless control. Yet she stood there choosing me, feeling something real and unguarded in a way that left no space for doubt. The answer came just as quietly, but with the same certainty. I felt it too. Relief softened her expression, blending with something brighter, something that looked almost like joy. When she kissed me again, it carried a warmth that felt different from before, less uncertain, more certain of what it meant. For a moment, everything felt simple. The next step didn't come with answers or plans, just a quiet willingness to face whatever came together. The idea of something ordinary like breakfast felt strangely significant, a small promise of something beyond a single night. That fragile calm didn't last. The sound of her phone broke through the moment, sharp and insistent. Ignoring it felt right at first, like protecting something delicate. But it refused to fade, ringing again and again until it couldn't be dismissed. When she finally answered, the shift was immediate. I couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but I didn't need to. The tension in her posture, the way her expression tightened, said everything. Something had gone wrong. Words leaked, and pictures cut through the air heavy with implications. By the time the call ended, the atmosphere had completely changed. The softness from moments ago was gone, replaced by something cold and urgent. Images from the gala had spread, pulling us into a spotlight neither of us could control. Speculation followed, twisting the truth into something uglier, something designed to entertain strangers at our expense. The version of me being shared wasn't real, but it didn't matter. It was loud enough to drown out anything true. The explanation came carefully, but it didn't soften the impact. The situation had escalated beyond anything simple. It wasn't just personal anymore, it was public, complicated, and dangerous in ways I had never experienced. Sitting there, the weight of it all settled in. The difference between our worlds felt sharper than ever. For her, this meant damage control, strategy, protection. For me, it meant exposure, judgment, a life turned inside out without warning. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The woman who had stood vulnerable in front of me only hours before was retreating, replaced by the version of herself built to survive situations like this. It created distance instantly. The words that followed confirmed it. This wasn't just about feelings anymore. It was about consequences, about reality pressing in from all sides. Protecting me was part of it, but so was protecting everything she had built. Something inside me hardened then, not out of anger, but clarity. The space between us felt too wide to bridge. Leaving didn't come with drama or raised voices. It came with quiet understanding, with the recognition that whatever had existed between us had collided with a world too complicated to ignore. Walking away felt like stepping out of something fragile before it could break further. The weeks that followed unraveled everything. The images spread faster than I could process, pulling my name into conversations I had never been part of. Strangers dissected my life, reducing it to assumptions and labels that had nothing to do with who I was. The consequences came quickly. Work disappeared, replaced by polite excuses and blunt dismissals. The life I had built, fragile as it was, collapsed under the weight of attention I never asked for. Silence became easier than facing it all. Her attempts to reach me went unanswered. Every call, every message remained untouched, not out of indifference, but because there was nothing left to say that could fix what had already broken. Time passed, but the emptiness remained. Then one afternoon, the quiet was interrupted. A knock at the door, persistent and familiar. Her voice followed, softer than I remembered, carrying something that made it harder to ignore. Still, I didn't move. Not until the sound of paper sliding across the floor broke through the hesitation. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Her handwriting was unmistakable, elegant even in something so simple. Inside, the message was brief but carried weight. An invitation or maybe a final attempt. A place that held the beginning of everything. It would be easy to walk away from it, to let the story end where it had already fractured. But some things don't let go that easily. That night, I found myself standing outside the diner again, drawn back to the place where everything had first changed. Inside, the familiar setting felt different, carrying memories that hadn't faded. She was there, waiting in the same booth, but the version of her sitting there was nothing like the one the world knew. The sharp edges were gone, replaced by exhaustion, by something quieter and more real. She looked up when I approached, and the relief that crossed her face said more than anything she could have spoken. I sat across from her, the same place where it had all begun. Up close, the toll of the past weeks was impossible to ignore. The confidence was still there, but it was layered with something heavier, something worn down. The words that left me were simple, almost automatic. She looked tired. Her response came with a faint laugh, but it carried more weight than humor, echoing everything that had changed since the night our worlds collided. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile as she sat there, hands wrapped tightly around the coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She admitted she had been coming back every night since I walked away, sitting in that same booth, replaying everything, searching for the right words, waiting, hoping that somehow I would walk through the door again and give her the chance she hadn't taken when it mattered. When she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes were bright, heavy with everything she hadn't said before. The truth came slowly at first, then all at once. That morning hadn't been about strategy or reputation or controlling the fallout. It had been about fear, not the kind she understood or knew how to manage, but something deeper, something that had caught her completely off guard. She hadn't been thinking about damage control. She had been thinking about me. About how quickly I had become important, how easily I had disrupted a life she had spent years building with precision and control. The realization had shaken her, left her exposed in a way she didn't know how to handle. And instead of facing it, she had hidden behind something familiar, something safer. She had let me believe it was all business because admitting the truth felt too dangerous. The confession settled heavily between us. She didn't try to excuse it or soften it. She called it what it was, fear, and a mistake born from it. In trying to protect herself, she had pushed away the one thing that had made everything feel real. The past weeks had only made that clearer. She described the emptiness of returning to her old life. The endless cycle of meetings and conversations that never went beyond the surface. Everything that once felt important now felt hollow, and without hesitation she admitted she couldn't go back to it. Then she told me what she had done. She had walked away from it all. The position, the power, the identity she had built over years, gone just like that, not out of impulse but out of clarity, because once she had felt something real, something honest, nothing else could compare. The weight of it was overwhelming. She wasn't abandoning her life, she was choosing a different one. One that meant something beyond numbers and expectations. Her hands found mine across the table, steady and warm, grounding the moment. She acknowledged everything I had gone through, the cruelty, the judgment, the way I had been left to face it alone. There was regret there, deep and genuine, not just for what had happened, but for not standing beside me when I needed her most. None of it had been ignored. None of it had been forgotten. She spoke about the obstacles without hesitation. The people who would never accept us, the systems that would push back, the expectations that would try to define everything, and just as clearly, she dismissed them. None of it mattered more than what she felt, more than what we could build together. When she said she loved me, it didn't sound dramatic or rehearsed. It was simple, steady, and certain. Every word carried truth, shaped by everything she had risked and everything she had already lost. The answer came just as naturally. There was no hesitation left, no fear strong enough to outweigh what had already grown between us. Agreeing didn't feel like a leap anymore. It felt like stepping into something that had been waiting all along. Time moved forward and everything changed with it. A year later, the same booth held a different kind of story. The past hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, reshaped into something that no longer controlled us. The chaos had settled into something steadier, something real. Life together hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest. Every challenge faced side by side, every moment built with intention instead of expectation. The noise of the outside world had faded, replaced by something quieter and far more meaningful. She had rebuilt her career on her own terms, choosing work that reflected who she had become rather than who she had been expected to be. I had found my own footing too, in a life that felt earned and entirely mine. What we built wasn't about escaping reality. It was about creating one that finally felt right. That night, sitting across from her again, the weight of everything we had been through settled into something warm and steady. She looked different, not in appearance but in presence. Lighter, freer, like she was finally living instead of performing. The words I had carried for weeks rose to the surface, shaped by everything we had become. Love had grown into something deeper, something that felt like home in a way I had never known before. There was no grand speech, no perfect moment, just honesty. The small box placed between us said the rest. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Then everything unfolded at once: emotion, disbelief, joy breaking through in a way that couldn't be contained. Her answer didn't need elaboration. It lived in her expression, in the way her voice trembled with certainty, in the way she held onto me like she had no intention of ever letting go again. The ring was simple, but it didn't need to be anything more. It represented everything we had fought through, everything we had chosen despite the odds. Around us, the world continued as it always had, but in that small space, everything felt significant. Familiar faces turned toward us, warmth spreading through the room in quiet celebration. It was the kind of place where happiness didn't need permission to exist. Later, the city stretched out around us as we walked side by side, hands intertwined. The future no longer uncertain but open in the best possible way. What had started as an accident had become something far greater than either of us could have planned. Not just love, but understanding. Not just connection, but growth. We had found each other in the most unexpected way, and in doing so, we had found ourselves too. Sometimes the most ordinary moments carry the power to change everything. A small mistake, a fleeting encounter, a single choice to look beyond the surface. And sometimes, if everything aligns just right, those moments become the beginning of something lasting. Not perfect, not effortless, but real in a way that makes every risk worth taking.